Today's guest is Eric Limburg. He's sets the creative vision for all of WSU's marketing and communications campaign. He oversees visual design, and there's a pretty big project he's worked on that we'll talk about in a minute. So without further ado, please help me welcome Eric. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. Could you tell us a little more about yourself? I gave like a one-sentence intro, but tell us more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you for asking me. I was going to joke that the term expert is a pretty loose term when you talk to me about me. So I would rather have this be a conversation rather than me just standing here talking about my work. So having been a student at WSU, I've been in your guys' shoes, and so that's kind of where I'd like to start. Is just who I am. I actually grew up in Pullman. My dad was a professor here, and loved WSU. Never thought I would still be here, to be perfectly honest. But I went to WSU, and at the time, there was no DTC program. And so I graduated, got my undergrad in advertising and communications, and I minored in art, and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. One of those where it's like, oh man, I'm done with school, now what? And so I figured, I loved the creative aspect. I loved design. And, from my perspective, there was the really strong business-minded people that didn't understand the creative mind. And there were really great creatives that didn't understand the business aspect of things. And so I thought, well, boy, I'll try to do both. And so I went on here at WSU and got my MBA. And sometimes you have to go down a path to figure out that's what you don't want to do. And so after getting my MBA, I realized, okay, I don't like business school a whole lot. I prefer the creative side of things, but it gave me a really great foundation for some of the things I've been able to do. So finished my MBA, started working at WSU, worked in design and printing services for a while, and then I moved over to WSU Athletics. And it was right after WSU Athletics had done a rebrand with Nike. And there was kind of a need there for somebody to help manage that brand and ensure its consistency within the athletic department. And so I got the opportunity to work with that and try to steer that the best I could, which was really, really cool, just to see how Nike approached things and worked with things. So currently, like Tor said, I'm in university marketing communications here at WSU. And so my role is I'm the creative director, so over the visual assets of the brand. So there's a small design team that I work with, and then our video team and our photo team. And so we work together to market and tell the stories of WSU in the best visual way that we possibly can. So our responsibilities are really, we have a system, what we call a system perspective, in that we try to represent all of WSU, but we also try to represent WSU Pullman campus specifically. So
there's a question here. Do you oversee all of those teams?
Yeah. So design team, and I do say, we're a pretty lean team. We have 4 designers. We have 3 photographers and 3 videographers. So they do a lot of work, and they do a lot of great work with what we're asking them to do. So, but it's super, super fun. So that's a little bit about me. So
I just want to back up a second and say that you're underselling yourself when you say you don't want to call yourself an expert, but you can be a humble expert, so that's okay. That's totally cool.
I still feel like a novice in a lot of ways. So
That's probably a healthy thing. We've talked before about how we're, even as people have been in the industry for years, we're still learning, right? You don't just, there's no point where you figured it all out. There just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you majored in advertising and minored in art.
Correct.
Was there any particular thing that you like really got you into graphic design? Like something I don't know, something that clicked for you, or perhaps a different way to come at this. You said you got your MBA. Hello, expert. Anyway, you got your MBA and then you decided business wasn't really what you wanted. What was it there that didn't click? So either of those questions.
Yeah. So I've always, probably like a lot of you guys, I've always loved the creative aspect of things. I've loved drawing and painting and just making weird art, right? Like kindergarten, you're making the macaroni art, and I was always the kid that like had to have it perfect and was only half done when time was up, right? And even when I was young, my parents, to keep me quiet in church, would give me a notepad and a pencil, and so I would just sit there and doodle and draw. I always loved doing that stuff, and so as I got older and started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? I didn't want to be a starving artist, right? Where I had to try and sell paintings for a living. And again, you have to remember, 20, 30 years ago, graphic design was a very different field. It was much more hands-on. You're cutting and pasting things literally because the digital element wasn't sophisticated enough yet.
I remember those days where you literally were cutting things out with scissors or X-Acto knives and things like that. I remember that.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I remember Photoshop, the initial Photoshop, right? When I was in school, like that was like,
I had a pirated copy. Okay, I had a pirated. Sorry, Adobe, if you're listening. Yep. I had a pirated copy of Photoshop 1.0. So
I mean, before InDesign, there was a thing called PageMaker. Started in PageMaker, really from the inception of this going digital. So so there wasn't a single moment, but I realized actually while I was at WSU. So those of you that are on the Pullman campus, there's what's called the Daily Evergreen, right? The newspaper, the student newspaper. And I remember as a student looking through that and being like, man, they could really use some help. And not in an arrogant way, but I could do better than that. Short time later, I ended up working for the Daily Evergreen in their graphic design department, creating ads and different layouts for them, and also working for the Chinook, which is the yearbook. Here I'm in Pullman. And so that kind of sparked me as seeing this huge opportunity for digital design coming up, commercial art, right? Just the business side of it, where you could work full time and didn't have to try and sell your art on a piece by piece basis. And that was really, really interesting to me and really exciting. So
that's cool.
So yeah, I mean, and since then, like I said, there's just been more opportunities to see this kind of creative field grow. I mean, even in looking at your expert series, right? You have illustrators, you have UI and UX experts, right? You have animators and designers, all kinds.
Reality and
yes,
intranet designers and yeah, all kinds of people. Well, when you really think about it, communication, even just a finite aspect of communication like advertising touches all of these areas nowadays. Like you have to have at least an understanding of the connection, even if you're not a practitioner of that other thing.
Yes. Well, and that was one of the things as I was young and looking at this that really interested me. And again, I don't know how all of you feel, but I love the fact that these visual things could make you feel emotion, right? That
Mhm.
You could see a poster or a video or something, and it made you emotional. It made you, either sad, or it could make you super excited about something. Like the fact, kind of that storytelling aspect of the visual elements is really motivational. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
thought that was really cool.
I agree. That's one of the things that drew me to design. So let's see. There's a bunch of questions here.
Yeah.
Some of these I'm actually going to save to the end because I was going to ask them anyway. Um, but on the question of like all of the overseeing of the different teams and all the goals of those teams, um, as a creative person, let me rephrase that. When I first got into creative work, the thing I hated most was the non-creative work, which which is the paperwork and the management, right? But you can't do one without the other. So
Yeah.
how did you learn how to do the management of other teams, delegation, things like that? And how do you deal with work-life balance?
Like anything, it came gradually. Um, when I first started, I say just a designer, but I was just happy to design. And as I got more experience, I kind of started managing the workload of myself and the other designers. So I wasn't their manager, but I would help distribute work and
Mm,
make sure that it was even. And then as I went into athletics, I had the opportunity to manage another full-time employee that we worked closely together. And from there, it grew. While I was in athletics, I was I was the only designer initially, and it grew. So there were two other designers, and then a social media manager, and then that person had a team of interns. And again, part of that was just the nature of digital communication and visual assets growing at that time. Um, so I feel super fortunate in that the timing was really good, that
mm,
I could show the value of those things to the athletic department that was growing and had a new brand and was, had just recently changed leadership. And so I was super fortunate in that. Um, and then coming to my current position, when I was hired in my current position, I was hired as the manager over the designers, the at the time the four designers. And as things realigned and grew, my boss felt like it makes sense to have all the visual communication elements under one person. And
mm,
so photo and video kind of fell underneath me, and to me that also made sense. And I've been able to learn a lot from the experts in photo and video and design, right? To your point that you mentioned earlier, you never really stop learning in this
mhm.
field. There's so many different areas that you can become an expert in, that the day that you think, okay, I think I got it all figured out, is the day that you're in trouble,
Well
because you're
said.
probably not going to grow anymore. So
Right. Well,
as far as work-life balance, um, so it is a balance. That's one of those things that, to be perfectly honest, I loved athletics. It was so fun. It was so creative. And, doing that storytelling of emotion and trying to get people excited was awesome. But it was also one of those things where, I'm working a ton, where, you're stretched thin. And like I said, I initially, there was one designer, and then there was two of us,
mhm,
and there was three of us, and then there was, a social media manager that was helping out, and then a team of interns. And it still wasn't enough. I was working 60 hours plus a week.
mhm.
And it just felt like, I'm on call on the weekends if anything was needed. And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not getting a doctor's salary to be on call for the weekend. And so I did have to, for my own personal benefit, have to dial it back a little bit and say, okay, I do need a better work-life balance, because work was quickly overcoming me to the point where I wasn't very healthy. So,
I faced the same problem when I was much younger. Early in my design career, I was working for a marketing agency, and they would use you as much as you would let them use you. I remember once putting in over 100 hours in 1 week, and there's only 140 work hours in a week. So, like 100 hours means there's not much time for sleeping. But I guess for the students here, I would say, please be careful about that. You have to set healthy boundaries for yourself. If you don't watch out for your own well-being, your job is probably not going to watch out for it for you.
And creative, it's one of those things. What's the saying where, if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I related to that, because I remember my first job, I was like, I could do this the rest of my life. This is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. But because there's that love for it, it can be overwhelming, because you keep working on it. You just give. You can give, because it's fun and it's creative, but it is not always healthy, and it eventually will probably burn you out. So that's the danger of it, I guess.
There's a couple questions from students in here about setting boundaries and about mental health and stuff. I know one thing that I faced, and I'm curious if you faced it too, but early on, I had trouble deciding which things to be a perfectionist about. And so I was a perfectionist about everything. And that really leads to burnout. Did you have that problem?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we still often have that conversation of when is it good enough?
Mm-hmm.
Right? When is something give the desired communication visually? And that's different for every piece, right? Sometimes it does take a little more attention. It takes that extra effort to make something really, really nice. And sometimes you're like, this one's not going in my portfolio, and I just need to get it done. And that's okay too. I don't feel like everything, I often tell the designers, not everything we do is the Mona Lisa. We have other projects we need to work on. We need to say that's good enough. I like it. Let's not keep tinkering with it. Let's move it on and get it done. So
yeah, I chances are a lot of designers are like that. And again, I feel like it's something I need to keep learning. And I've never quite learned it, because every project is different. There's been a number of questions about favorite projects or most interesting things, but I want to go back for a second to something you just said to lead into that. So we were talking about working for athletics and how, a lot of the work is very emotionally charged in a sense. People get passionate about athletics more than they do about even a brand of computers or something. I mean, there's a few brands people get super hyped about, right? But you're not going to get hyped about cereal or, a loaf of bread or something like that. But people love sports, right? And WSU in particular has very passionate followers. And even though you're not just at athletics anymore, you still manage the brand that people are passionate about. And just was it really that recently? Yeah. You relaunched the brand, right? You updated, redesigned, evolved the brand.
Yep.
And so I see that as like a huge project. I mean, having done rebranding, but I'd love to hear more about that. Like, how did it begin? What did that process look like? Ups and downs, things like that.
It's been a lot of fun creative projects. I would say that the brand, maybe because it's one of the most recent things, has been one of the most fun things, because I was a student here. I love WSU. And so the chance to rebrand WSU was really appealing and really exciting. So if I can share just a little bit about that process.
Yeah. I mean, don't share anything you shouldn't share, but
No, yeah. So what kind of led to this is the brand really hadn't evolved in about 20 years. So it was 2000 when the brand originally came out for WSU, and it had minor adjustments and tweaks, but so they had been talking, they being marketing communications, had really been talking about a rebrand since before I came into the unit. It had been 5 or 6 years that they were saying, okay, we need to rebrand. And when I came on, and there were a few other things that kind of fell into place where it was like, okay, now's our time. We need to get this done. Let's stop talking about it and do this. And part of what kind of drove that is, for those of you that have been here, more than a year, you'll know that the previous logo was the WSU logo with the cougar head inside the shield. You'll remember we call it the shield logo. And that was for the academic side of WSU. The spirit side of WSU, like athletics and like alumni association and some of these other, student groups, some of these other departments, they just used the cougar head. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect visually. We had, people wanting to use the cougar head who needed to use the academic shield version, and sometimes vice versa. And so part of it really was just, let's be consistent, right? And so what was great is as we started this process, we first did what we call an impact report. So we went around the campuses, and we took pictures of, okay, all of the areas that would be impacted by this rebrand. And there was a lot. Everything from, good example in Pullman, there's the huge sign, right, as you come onto campus, that's in that limestone. Obviously hasn't been updated, but everything from that to digital elements, our web components, to our stationery, just this wide area that could be impacted. And so
hold on, I'm like
Yeah.
a little overwhelmed at the idea of having to catalog every instance of the WSU logo across all the campuses.
I'm sure we missed stuff. But we divided up and said, okay, you take this part of campus and you take this part of campus, and just find things that we need to at least be mindful of as we're rebranding. Not that, okay, we have to rebrand that, we have to rebrand that, we have to rebrand that, but okay, what are some elements that we at least need to be thinking about how this would apply? And so it's a pretty hefty document. And so we're looking at what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to do with this rebrand? And the first and foremost thing was modernize it. We also wanted to make sure that it was representative of a system. So we couldn't have it be Pullman specific. It needed to represent Tri-Cities and Everett and Vancouver and Spokane and global campus, right? So everybody needed an equal claim in that. And then have it be unique to WSU and easy to use from both a print and a digital perspective. And so, we experimented with a lot of different things, and some of them were really, really cool, but it didn't fit one of those criteria, right? So, for example, we came up with some really cool marks that were really modern, that could have represented WSU, but they weren't unique to WSU. It didn't fit, right? And I don't know how to explain it other than that. But
Well,
um,
I really like this idea that you started the project with sort of some filters or some criteria
yeah,
to make sure everyone's on the same page as we're working on this stuff. Yeah, it's okay if you come up with ideas outside of it, but then we're going to pass it through the filter and see what survives, right? What makes it through. I'm tempted to ask you to share some of those designs, but I'm not going to. You
well,
probably should.
yeah, I would love to. If it wasn't recorded, maybe I would. But no, I'm
Okay,
just
turn
kidding.
off the record. No,
No.
just kidding.
But even one of the things that we did that was a little taboo, again, I won't share anything, but I will tell you is trying to modernize the Coug head, right? So the Coug head is loved, right, by WSU, but we experimented with some ways of, hey, maybe let's adjust this or change it to make it more modern. And as we did that, we were like, yeah, that's not going to work. That's let's not do that. And that's okay. Sometimes you gotta go down that road sufficiently enough to see we don't want to go down that road. And so at the end of the day, there's so much equity and so much love and passion for the Coug head that we felt like we couldn't really go away from it. Like this is WSU, and this is what represents WSU. So let's use it as our unifying mark. Let's make it our focus, and let's build around that. And so that's kind of what we did with this process. And I could take a whole another hour just talking about the brand and the different elements and components. I mean, from colors to typography to secondary logos to photography, and that's just the visual elements, right? There is a whole narrative and tone words that we worked on to make sure that they connected and incorporated together instead of being two separate pieces. And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. And that was one of the projects that
So
one of my favorites. So
yeah, I'm sure we could talk for a long time. And I am even curious about like, okay, so how did you come up with this particular color palette? Because it is different, right? It's not the same color palette, but people aren't quite as passionate about the secondary colors as they are about the crimson and gray, right? You still need the crimson and gray, or you're going to have legions of Cougs descending on your office with pitchforks. But it's not just your team. Like, I know you had to get buy-in from people outside the design department. So what was that like? Like, was there a process? Were there challenges there?
Yeah, lots and lots of communication. And again, like I mentioned, this had been talked about for 5 or 6 years. And so most people were aware of it, but I think some people thought maybe it had stalled because we had been talking about it, after so many years, you're like, yeah, right, that's not really going to happen. Right. So what we did is we had we called it a brand advisory committee. And it was, I think there was a dozen or 15 individuals that represented different campuses and colleges and departments. And they were kind of, they would give us feedback along the way. They were kind of our, guiding light as we went. So we would share, colors, we would share logos, we would share different ideas and get kind of their feedback of, yeah, that would really work. And most of these people, they were designers, they were communicators, there were people on the web team, there were people in student affairs or trademark and licensing, right? So these were people who would actively be using,
sure,
or helping, kind of a brand ambassador, I guess, kind of guarding this brand and helping to ensure its consistent use. And so we wanted their input, we wanted their buy-in, because at the end of the day, our office isn't creating everything. And so we need everybody to understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish with these visual elements and why it's important, because they're going to be the ones creating that material. And so, at the end of the day, I kind of look at it as really we're just building this foundation that lets other creatives around WSU build on, right? So this brand is the foundation elements. You don't have to, there's plenty of other things that you could do to explore outside of that, but this is the foundation to build on for WSU, visual identity and brand. So
I've worked on a couple large scale rebranding projects elsewhere. And I think an advisory committee made of people from all around the organization is pretty common because it makes sense, right? We want to get everyone's input. I'm curious, did they have like authority in the process, or were they just advisory?
That's a great question. We had this conversation about, this is not a democracy. We're not gonna vote on these things. I would say that it was an advisory committee, but depending on how passionate people felt about different elements, I would be in some, I don't want to say trouble. I would be maybe compromising what I thought was best if I went against what they're advising, right? So if they say, so here's a great example. So as we talked about colors, WSU previously to this rebrand used secondary colors in a different way, where they tried to almost do sub brands. So different colleges would take a color and right. say, we're going to be the blue college, and we're going to be the green college. And what ended up happening is it didn't feel like WSU. There was no tie into Washington State University because that crimson and gray is so important and so passionate and loved. And so we had this conversation in our advisory group about, do we even use secondary colors? Do we just have crimson and gray? And we talked about some of the strongest brands in the world, right? You think about Starbucks, you think about green, you think about Coca-Cola, and it's that red, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes they do use secondary colors, but for marketing and communication purposes, they focus on their primary colors. And so we went back and forth on that, and the group was actually pretty evenly divided on that. And we decided to, okay, let's try to find a compromise, which you often do in design, right?
Absolutely.
And let's come up with what we call accent colors for people to use, so that they're not just limited to crimson and gray, but let's put some specific guidelines around it on how to use it, so that people don't turn their website blue or green, right? So let's focus on crimson and gray. But yeah, you do have a palette of other colors to use if you need to use those, but they need to complement crimson and gray, and they need to be limited in their use. And so that was a great example of this advisory committee kind of giving us, okay, well, why would you want secondary colors? Well, why wouldn't you want secondary colors? Well, where would they be used, and how would they be used? And so this conversation of the importance of it, as opposed to voting, who wants it, who doesn't want it, right? So I would say that they had tremendous input, and most of the time we went with their advice and their guidance. So
that's great. Hey, I am going to paste into the text chat a URL to the new brand book, brand.wsu.edu. I've introduced it in my classes, but in case anyone hasn't seen it, we do review your work, Eric. So, if your ears are burning, that's us looking at your website.
Well, and one other thing I will say with that is what we've called this is a brand evolution,
right.
Because you guys know WSU, we don't have the resources to just snap our fingers and everything changes overnight, right? All the signs, everything doesn't change from the shield to the cougar head to the new logo and the new brand. And so we talked about it's an evolution. It's going to take time. And so, even since we launched that site, honestly, we've made updates to it because we've learned some things and said, oh yeah, we need to be clear in this area, or we need to give more direction here. And so I say that so that as you look at the site, if you see stuff that you're like, what is that? That's way off. Let us know. We're continuing to evolve it and help people understand the importance of the WSU brand. So.
Well, and I think that's an important thing to remember about branding, especially for a very large organization, is that it has to be constantly shifting, getting tweaked. There's new opportunities arising where you're like, well, we never thought about that. We better put that in the brand book. We're going to have to address that. So it's never just set and forget, ever.
Right. And that was the thing that I think WSU got a little bit behind in is, okay, we got our brand, and 20 years later, it's typically not something you see, every 3 to 5 years, you'll see kind of an update of some type, or an evolution, which that's part of our reasoning too. This is going to change. This is going to change. We're not done, and it's not going to stay like this for the next 20 years. So.
There were a couple of questions as you were talking about, how do you deal professionally with input that's maybe not good? Like it's either frustrating or it's just from someone who doesn't understand the process. Like, did you have to deal with that? Obviously, I don't want names or anything like that, but it's sort of like, how do you deal with a difficult client, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. And that's something I'm learning from my boss a lot because it's really important to educate people. Most of the time, people just don't understand the importance of having a consistent brand. And one of the things that we try to implement is, don't just be compliant. Compliant is like the bare minimum, right? Like, I kind of squeaked in, I'm just barely compliant. Be committed, be committed to WSU. Don't just be compliant. And so as you're committed to WSU, that means you're gonna follow the things, and you're gonna implement what we've outlined in the best way you can to highlight Washington State University. So I think education is really important. And we have had some really good conversations with people that feel like, I'm special, I'm different.
My needs are different.
And I should be an exception to the WSU brand for whatever reason. And honestly, most of the time it's like, okay, let's talk about why you feel you're an exception. And we talk through how they're different, how they're the same, maybe where some of the resources come from, the importance of WSU in their messaging, in their visual content, and what would happen if WSU was not represented in that. And having them kind of see and understand the importance of WSU from a consistency standpoint. And then there's some times where people truly are like, okay, you are a little bit different, and you are truly an exception, but you still need to be tied to WSU. So let's figure out a new way to do that. Let's figure out a better way to have you represented visually for WSU, as opposed to just something completely separate that has no connection at all to the university. So it's a lot of education, a lot of understanding on both people's parts. If people just say, no, this is what I want, that's really tough. You have to help say, okay, let's find out more. Let's help me understand, right? I think a lot of times, you mentioned this, that it's about, you have to understand a lot of different disciplines. And not necessarily be an expert on them, but just understand. And so if you can get people, hey, help me understand this. This I want to make it the best for us and for you. They're a lot more willing to work with you. So
Well, it was and continues to be a large project with a lot of parts. So kudos to you for pulling it off really well. I mean, at least from the outside, it looks like it's gone smoothly. So hopefully you feel it's gone smoothly.
yeah, it's like that duck on the water, right? You're looks all calm and peaceful, but you're paddling like crazy under the
Yeah.
water. You just can't see it. So
Right. Hey, there are a lot of questions here. There have been many questions from students basically looking for advice about getting into branding or working with branding or their own personal brand. Like there are a lot of branding questions that students have because they they see WSU, they see all these big brands out there, but how did they get into that? What should they be learning? How would you answer that?
that's a great question. I don't know that there is a one path, right? I know people who work with brands, and they're not huge brands, but they're still brands to some degree that they were writers, and now they're managing the brand. Some of them were videographers, and now they're managing, the brand. Sometimes they're designers like myself. So there's not a certain path. My suggestion, and this I'll try to be careful because I realize it goes against what I talked about before with the work-life balance, but I do think you can do it. Is to immerse yourself in good design. And what I mean by that is, look at what others are doing around you. There's plenty of great design in everything that we see around us that you can kind of evaluate. Look at different industries and different businesses and who their target audience is. And okay, why are they using that design and those colors and that style as opposed to whatever this other product is or this business. So I would say experiment. Sometimes it takes good design, surrounding yourself with good design and kind of deconstructing it and seeing what they did and why they did that so that you can build it appropriately. It's like being a mechanic. Okay, what's wrong? I have to tear the engine apart to put it back together in the right way. Do that with design. Why did they do that? Why did they use the colors? Why did they use that type treatment or that photography? And as you tear things apart and break it and ruin it, that's how you build it.
Right.
Again, seeing what doesn't work sometimes is as beneficial as finding the best solution. So as you're building your own brands, I would just say immerse yourself in good design and figure out why it works and why it doesn't work. So good example, this weekend, I went with my brother-in-law to a Portland Trailblazers game. So we went to Portland, and first time in a couple of years that we've gone to, something like that. And Portland's a pretty fun, weird artistic town. And so I know he got frustrated with me because I'm like taking pictures of everything as we're going around because they're just really cool things that you don't see in Pullman. A art and music museum, and even at the Portland Trailblazers game, there were some designs and things that I'm like, hold on just a second, and I'm taking pictures of it, and he's just kind of like, oh geez, like, but it's all around us. You just have to look at things that inspire you, things that you can take inspiration from, and kind of, okay, what can I do with this? Where could I use this? Where could I build it? And again, just immerse yourself in it. That doesn't mean you have to be working on stuff, but you can always be looking for stuff and recognizing kind of that inspiration.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if I actually answered your question.
I think you answered it from a couple of directions, but your main point about immersing yourself in good design, I think that's a great one, but it's a really broad, like, what does that mean for you? Well, it might mean you're checking out, the coolest portfolios on Behance or Dribbble, because you can't make it to Portland, you can't go to Seattle and see the art museum, but there is so much cool design on the internet. Go look at it, but also deconstruct it, like you were just saying. So before everything on the internet was popular, like I'm trying to get this off the shelf above me, but I have communication arts magazines.
Yep.
Going back 20 years, okay, because I saved them because they're full of cool design. And I'll even get them out and browse through them and take stuff apart. Like, okay, so why did they use only squares in this design? What would have happened if they used circles? What would have happened if all that was black and white instead of this sort of duotone, other color? Like, take it apart, change it around in your mind, and try to figure out what works, what doesn't work. How does it capture a vibe? And then you'll learn how to capture it in your own branding.
Yeah, I mean, even to the point where, again, I was flipping through Disney Plus with my kids, and we came across some of these Pixar shorts about different jobs at Pixar and some of the responsibilities, and one of them is sketch artists. One of them is about people that do the lighting. All they do is lighting, right? And different things, and things that I had never even thought of, like in Up, the movie Up, how I forget the old guy's name, but the old guy is all squares, right? If you look at everything, he's all squares, whereas his wife was circles, and they did that purposefully to try and talk about how one is rigid and not very flexible, and the other is kind of fun and more organic, and just things like that. Just watching a Disney show, I was like, gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. So you can pull some ideas and inspiration from around you, even if you're not really looking for it. So.
Right. Yeah, and putting yourself in the shoes of other creatives in different fields is useful like that. Like, wow, they did that in this animation. How would that translate to my two-dimensional print design?
Right.
Or I remember years ago there was a Disney movie, Brave. The girl with the red hair in like ancient Ireland or something, right? But I remember hearing the animator talk about how her hair was so complicated that it was technically its own character in the 3D animation system. Like, that's how complicated it was. And it's like, well, but it was also like a key point of the branding for the movie. Like, who this is, like, it's instantly recognizable. And what if there are elements like that in your design where, we don't have to make the whole thing. It's just this one thing that is actually its own character. What would happen if you looked at your design that way? I don't know. I love this idea of like reframing your own design based on what you learn from other creatives. So
there's very few ideas that are just so great that only one person has thought of them ever, right?
Yes, amen.
Most of the time, inspiration comes from seeing something and thinking, oh, I could use this, or I could try and apply that, or I could do that better, right? I could improve on that, and here's how I could improve on that. And so there's never really an original thought as far as design. I think everything usually stems from some other, whether you know it or not, it comes from some other idea, something you've seen, something you want to try. The completely original thought, even for the best work, I think is inspired by something else. So
feeding that inspiration.
And don't be afraid to again deconstruct stuff. Try things from other designs that you want to try to implement. What's the the saying about the highest form of flattery is imitation.
Yeah,
right?
imitation is the highest form of flattery, right?
I personally don't think it's terrible to try to, you don't want to copy somebody exactly, but to be inspired by their work, not imitate it. You don't want an exact copy, but to be inspired by it and take pieces from it, I don't think is terrible at all. So
there's only 5 minutes left. If you could give one word of advice to up and coming designers, what would it be?
one thing that I've thought a lot about, and maybe Tori, you have thoughts on this, is it seems like we're entering into, again, when I started, there was this huge opportunity for digital, right? It was just growing in lots of different areas. And anymore, it feels like you have to be a specialist in a certain area. I see, again, motion designers. All they do is just motion, right? Or there's illustrators, digital illustrators, and they just illustrate and then they give it to somebody else to put into a design. I would say there's nothing wrong with that at all if you want to try to specialize in a certain area. But I also don't think it's terrible if you don't know what you want to do and you don't know if you want to specialize. So I think you can still be a generalist and be really good at what you do. So my advice to you is, like I said before, immerse yourself in good design, and it takes time. I know a lot of students and a lot of young designers feel like, gosh, why can't I be earning six figures from the time I leave school, right? Like that'd just be the best. That's usually not how it works. You always see these success stories of, I got this great opportunity right out of school. Usually you have to work and understand a little bit before you can get those opportunities. I mean, again, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. If you would have told me 20 years ago that I'm going to still be at WSU and I'm going to be a creative director, I would have said you're crazy 20 years ago.
Right.
But just be patient. Be patient with yourself. Don't feel like your success is determined by what you're doing right now. And if you do love the creative field, if you do love what you're doing, then have a plan, have a goal of, okay, this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to get there. And that may take, step by step for a year. It may take 5 years, it may take 10 years, but if you love doing this and you think you want to do it for the rest of your life, then plan that out and see what you have to do. But I think immersing yourself in good design and tearing apart design and rebuilding it and experimenting is one of the best things that you can really do. Just like any industry, if you're a chef, if just that's how you learn, and that's the best way outside of formal education and formal training, whether it be on the job or not. That's how you learn, right? Reading, studying, research, and just trying things, seeing what works. So.
And honestly, the chef analogy is really good because a practicing chef makes a lot of terrible food. They just do. They're going to make a lot of things that are inedible while they're learning how to make things that are amazing. Okay. Right. And the same is true for designers. You're going to make a lot of stuff that you're just going to throw away, but you still learn something from it. And, I like this idea of being patient, that your success is not defined by what you're doing right now, right? I would say your success is more defined by your commitment to like the long term, the craft, the creative craft, and the actual path through the industry that takes you. Who knows? I mean,
Right.
I went from working for a corporate marketing agency in New York City, and I ended up pivoting into international nonprofit work. Like, I made less money, but I was way happier. Way happier. Okay. But if you had asked me, even like a year or two ahead of time, I would have been like, what are you talking about? That's not going to, so.
Well, and design changes too. Sorry, I know we're over time, but
Yeah.
I look at the stuff that I did when I was a student, and I'm like, how am I here doing what I'm doing right now? When that's what I've made, So don't define success as, and honestly, I look at stuff that I did 2 years ago, and I'm like, yeah, that could have been better. So don't define your success by where you're at now. Just I think if you believe in yourself, it sounds again like some motivational poster, but if you believe in yourself and think you want to do this, make a plan and just immerse yourself in it, because it's fun. It really is fun, and it can be super, super rewarding. So
yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I know we had a ton of questions here. I will put them all together, and I'll combine the ones that are overlapping, and I'll shoot them over to you, and then email out to the department. So thank you, everyone.
thank you, everybody. Good luck.